Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Rick Richards Show, and I am your host, Rick Richards. This is the toned down version. I will not, I will not get into any controversial territory. I promise. Although everything is controversy nowadays, though, isn't it? Like almost everything now is political. Everything will rub people the wrong way. We got some issues, but you know what? Today we're going to rap about something that impacts all of us. It is May 30th, 2020, and I would like to wish a happy birthday to Darren, my boy Darren, cousin, 51 years old today. I remember him when he was just a cute little whippersnapper. Let me show you a picture. Let me show you a picture of me and Darren when we were just, how old would we? I think probably I'm younger. I'm the younger of us. And that's me, of course, with the blondish hair, and Darren with the brown hair. I think we were about 4 and 5. We weren't in school. Yeah, I would have been 4 and he would have been 5 or turning 5. Before he started kindergarten, before I started any kind of preschool. And I remember we were walking in the Kmart on Scott Road, back when there was a Kmart on Scott, around Scott and 72nd. And our moms are sisters, and they were walking with us, and they were shopping. And all I remember is that it was a spur of the moment thing. They saw somebody was doing free photos, or cheap photos, I guess it would have been. And I think we had eaten ice cream that day because my mom, she spit on her hand and she started cleaning my face before the picture. And one of the things that's funny about this picture, and you know, it was funny at the time because the guy taking the picture constructed our pose, and he got me to go like this with my fist up, and Darren to go in the more passive position with his hand down. And I thought that was funny. For years afterwards, I got to show the fist, and Darren got to be the passive one, even though he's 9 months older than me. Anyways, yeah, we took the picture, and we still have that picture. I think that's the first picture of us together. Maybe not. Well, the first portrait together. Anyways, happy birthday, Darren, and many more, big guy. Many more. Saw Darren just the other day. So it's interesting, though. You know, a lot of my generation now, Gen X, is getting older, right? And you know, they're all sort of approaching their 50s now, and well, are in their 50s, a lot of Gen X, and millennials now are approaching 40s, right? And if you're part of Generation X, Gen X, you will remember, you know, back in the 90s, we were sort of called the slacker generation. And Gen X was a very nihilistic generation. You know, I could probably do this, I could probably do this video with somebody else, right? It would be good to riff with somebody else. So maybe I'll keep it short and save that for a later time. But a lot of people now my age, they will have some frustrations dealing with younger people, right? And those frustrations would be, you don't see the same work ethic. I think this is a problem that we've created in them, right? You know, Gen X, the way kids in the Gen X generation was maybe the only generation, at least for quite some time, that was essentially left on its own. A lot of people will talk about how they used to play outside, they'd spend all day outside and things like that. You'll hear boomers talk about it and people older than that. And it was the same for our generation. But there was a difference. There was a big difference. Almost all those boomers, you know, they would be free to wander around the neighborhood and all that stuff. And then they would go home and their mom would be there, right? But with my generation, that so often it wasn't the case. You know, we would get a key around our neck. They even had a name for it, latchkey kids, which you don't even see anymore. But basically, you'd wear a key around your neck. And then when you got home from school, you know, your mom and your dad would both be out working. So you would let yourself in, flip on the ABC afternoon after school special. They called it the after school special because it was essentially the babysitter, and you know, kids would watch it, and they were kind of corny shows, but a part of our childhood nonetheless. But so what you see though with Gen X is you see the development of a very independent generation, right? Now, ours was one of the first generations to be widely abused in many ways. You know, the prior generations, they didn't have the ready access to drugs. Um, and the post generations were not let out of their parents' sight that much. See, what happened in the age of Gen X, you started getting a lot of kidnappings, right? This is the era when a lot of kids would just go missing, right? I mean, this still happens to a degree, but it is much more rare, and it makes national news when it does happen. And you know, more often than not, it's usually a parent, right? It's usually a divorced parent that's unhappy with the arrangement, and they take their kid and, you know, make a run for the fence kind of thing, right? But I mean, with the Gen X, this was the first generation, and you know, this does go back to boomers. I don't like to rag on boomers, but they were a very, very selfish generation. The boomers were very, very selfish. They were all about peace and love and everything free until they were a little bit older, and then they started making money, and then it was all me, 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 right? And they put themselves in their careers many times ahead of their children's generation, Gen X, right? And I mean, you can see it's much different now. Most people with kids now, they sacrifice a lot to have kids, right? You know, you have, if you want your kid in a sport, chances are you're going to have to coach, or you're going to have to volunteer. You're doing all this stuff, right? That wasn't the case back then. They used to have dedicated coaches, and volunteers for whatever reason weren't needed. School, same thing, right? Like when I was a kid, you would, if you had a field trip, which, you know, first of all, we didn't have nearly as many pro D days, so let's get that out there. But when I went on a field trip, generally we would all pile onto the Bluebird bus, right? And off we would go, and then off we would come back. And there was never any mention of money or anything like that. As far, I never had to bring money to school to pay for any of these trips. But now that's almost impossible to do. On the rare occasion, your kids will get on a bus and go off to a field trip. More often than not, it's, hey, parents, we need drivers. And so parents are called into driving. And I mean, a lot of this stuff has even been exasperated with COVID. Like, I mean, you know, I work till 5:30, let's say, each day. And then after that, I'll have maybe half an hour or 45 minutes to choke down a steak. And then I'm uploading homework and scanning homework that's being done. Like it's all been exasperated, you know, or I'm shopping for science supplies. But without getting too far off on that track, see, the thing with Gen X is they were a very independent generation. And like I said, there's problems that arose from that, and that they were preyed on by a lot of older people that would ply them with drugs and alcohol and molest them and kidnap them, which is obviously a very dark subject, I know. And that's why that level of freedom ended. But while it was on, there was a lot of lessons learned, right? There was a lot of things learned in terms of initiative. For example, when I was a kid, you would just walk out, right? Sometimes someone would bang on your door and say, "Hey, can Darren come out to play?" And that would be it. You'd leave, and that would be the start of your day, right? More often than not, you would just wander out, and you would come across kids, and then you would merge, or your groups would merge, and then you guys would all start doing an activity. And there was a lot of teamwork, in a sense, right? If you were a whiny kid or a crybaby or always taking offense, the group would straighten out your behavior. They would gang up on you, in a sense, which I know people will think is very cruel, or they would just not want to hang out with you, or they would tell you to go home, or they would call you a baby or whatever. And eventually you would accommodate yourself to the group, or you would be gone, right? And you would just be kind of the neighborhood pariah, right? I've seen this many, many times. And people often see bad things with that, but it really is a way of forcing people to get along, right? Because let's face it, a lot of times people are annoying, right? They do annoying shit. They are whiny and stuff like that. And that doesn't happen now. Those kids that are whiny or upset, first of all, kids are never really in a situation where they are the ones that constantly monitor and police each other's behavior, right? They're never in a situation where they have nothing to do and they decide to go do something. That's it. Yeah, I'm not okay. I shouldn't say never. I mean, it does happen, but it happens very infrequently. Almost always now, kids' behavior is structured, right? Part of a team, or they have structured activities. Like they try to structure things like a forest wall, a walk in a forest, right? Like, I mean, that kind of shit really shouldn't be structured. And as a result, though, what we're seeing, and this is a problem that has accelerated, we see this with the generations following Gen X, maybe even starting with Gen X, but we see a level of entitlement, right? We see people that come in at, say, 20 years of age or somewhere thereabouts that want to work for a company, but they don't want to work in the mailroom. They don't want to sweep floors because they went to college, right? Because they got a piece of paper that tells them that's because they've had 20 years of pumping up their self-esteem that they're a genius just waiting to be unleashed on the world, right? You know, that do what makes you happy. That's what matters. If somebody asks you to do something that you're not comfortable with, that's not okay, right? They've had a lifetime of this. And for us to perpetuate a lifetime of this kind of behavior on them, number one, you're not doing them any favors. You are not doing them any favors. It's the same thing as feeding the bears or feeding a wild animal. By doing that, you take away their ability to do for themselves. My philosophy with kids, and I try to adhere to this as best I can, is don't ever do what for your kids what they can do for themselves, right? Don't ever take ownership of their problems. Like sometimes kids will come up to you and they'll say, I don't know, I can't find this homework that I was working on. Well, they're coming to you and they're looking for you to solve that problem. So you know what I do? I just say, what are you going to do? And I put it back on them, right? And that's what we should always be doing, because I see a real lack of independent thinking from children. We have a system set up now where parents, teachers, everybody they're zeroed in on these little hothouse flowers, and they have no ability to think for themselves now. They are losing the ability to think for themselves. They are so used to being given direction that even the prospect of having to think for themselves pushes them into a form of paralysis. And this is really, really hard to combat against. And I know a lot of my South Asian brothers will think, oh, this is a white boy problem. No, it's not, my friends. I'm seeing it in your community as well. It is a problem that affects everybody, because everybody, the human condition is all being meshed into this kind of system, right? And, this is how the schools function. And it gets to the point where even if you want to free range your kids, I'll tell you a story, actually. When my son was, how old was he? Maybe 7. Well, let's rewind even further. So you saw that picture I showed at the beginning when I was 4. Well, a year after that, I was walking to school. So I lived probably about a mile from my school. And granted, things were a lot less busy back then, but I was only 5. But I would walk about a mile to school fairly often. On occasion, my dad would walk with me if he was around. But yeah, I do that on an ongoing basis. Didn't think anything of it. Sometimes on the way home, I would dilly-dally and I would, play in a ditch or pretend I was doing something. But I did that, right? Sometimes I would meet up with somebody from my school and walk home with them. You would come across different people. Sometimes people would want to beat me up on the way home, other kids, right? These are all situations you had to deal with. So when my son was about 7, first of all, I live not even a mile from our school, maybe half a mile. Yeah, maybe half a mile. When our kid was 7, I told him, look, you can walk home. And he was enthusiastic. He wanted to do it. And the first day he did it, I got a call from one of the parents, and they called me. And or maybe they called my wife and couldn't get a hold of her, but then they called me and, they explained who they were. And they said, I saw your son walking home. I wanted to know if everything was okay. Yeah, everything's fine. And they gave him a ride home. And this happened, I don't know, this happened like maybe a week or 2 later. Another parent, totally different one, also called me and said, hey, is everything okay? I saw your son walking alone. And I thought, holy shit, man. I mean, this is what we're up against, right? We're up against the bubble wrapping, the babying. Everybody is a baby now, and they can't do anything. They can't do anything as simple as walking. And anybody that knows me or follows me on Facebook or whatever, you'll see that I'm pretty patriarchal, I guess you could say, with my kids. I have them doing a lot of different things. I have them cutting the grass. I have them changing tires. I have them exercising. I would put them out to free range on the street, but there's no other kids out there. So, I mean, that's almost kind of pointless. But the point is, we really, really, really need to work on developing independence for our kids. And for you ladies out there, and yes, I will generalize because this is more of a feminine problem than a masculine problem. Am I a bad guy? I guess so. You have to take the chance that your kid might get hurt, right? They might, I don't know, fall on a playground that isn't completely safe. They may get yelled at by another kid. I don't know. Shit happens, right? And we're always obsessed with two things. We're obsessed with safety at all costs, and we're obsessed with fun. Everything you do has to be fun. No, that's the first big mistake. Forget about this fucking fun, okay? Fun is something that occasionally you should have, right? Fun is something when you've done your duties, you've done your whatever you're supposed to be doing, yeah, have some fun, right? But fun a worthwhile activity at times, it's not a means or an end of anything. Fun is just a diversion, right? It's a diversion from your main task, because we're not robots. We shouldn't be on a task 100% of the time. But fun should never be the meaning of life. Doing what feels good should never be the meaning of life. The meaning of life is achievement. The meaning of life is accomplishment. The meaning of life is building a robustness about yourself mentally, physically. It's about taking control of your life, taking control of your health, taking control of your career. It's about being autonomous. And, if you want to help other people, sure, great. That's a worthwhile endeavor. If you just want to help yourself, fine. That's fine too, right? Like, I mean, we can't have this, as long as you're not hurting anybody, that's fine, right? So, I mean, these are big problems. And how do these problems come to manifest in the world today? Well, let's talk about first how it affects people from my generation. I find, unfortunately, all the people I work with that are the most responsive, the quickest to achieve, and the most results oriented are all mostly in and around my age. There are exceptions. I mean, I do work with some guys that are younger, and they're go-getters, but that's why they work with me, right? Because I've recognized that they have that. And incidentally, they were raised in a little bit of a different way, right? They were raised, in more of a free, loose fashion. So, I mean, it affects us in the fact that this next generation needs to be a little more independent and a little more responsible and a little more accountable. That's another thing. We don't see accountability. If somebody else is always making your decisions and structuring your environment, why should you be accountable? There's no reason to be accountable because it's somebody else. And as much as that shortchanges us as a generation, it shortchanges them even more, because reality hits, right? Nature has a way of forming reality and enforcing reality. And if you were growing up with this overinflated self-esteem that everything you do is magic, and it's tested somewhere in the real world where people can't manage the results for you, you're going to get a rude awakening, right? You're going to get slapped in the face. And, I mean, everybody does get slapped in the face by reality, at some point, eventually it's going to happen. But the sooner it happens in your life, the better you're able to cope with it and adjust, right? Like if everybody tells you you're great at a sport and props you up all along, and then you end up spending $50,000 to go to some elite institution where you can practice this sport or this skill, and then you find out you're fucked. First of all, you've diverted unnecessarily resources into a career dead end. Secondly, you've broke yourself. And third, you don't know what to do at this point. You're just kind of lost. Whereas if you're 10 years old, you go in and you try to play hockey, let's say, and you're at it for a month, 6 months, and you just suck. And somebody said, and this is why sports are still such a good thing for young kids, because you can't hide everything, right? They are trying though. But you know what? If you realize at that stage that you are shitty at this, well, then you can say, okay, I either have to work better and work harder and become better, or I got to find something else, right? So you start to deal with the mechanism of failure and rejection. Failure is not the end of the word. I failed many times, and I'm a boss. I am a success. Trust me. But I fail all the time, right? And the thing is, it doesn't get me down. If I fail at something, sure, I'll be pissed off. I'll be disappointed. I might be depressed about it. But very quickly, I pivot towards doing something different or doing something else. So it never sticks on me, and it doesn't last on me, right? Because I can deal with it. And that's the challenge that these guys are going to have. Another big thing is competition. Whether you like to admit it or not, the world is a very competitive place, right? And, somebody coming in from any country, call it Pakistan, right? Let's say somebody coming in from Pakistan who's an intelligent guy that's been on his own since he was 8, basically earning a living. He arrives here when he's 20. Guess what? In the competitive landscape, he is going to fuck you up. Okay? He is going to fuck you up because he's not going to say, hey, I'm not working longer than 7 hours a day, or he's not going to avoid from taking accountability on something. He's going to accept. He's going to do what he's told, and he's going to accept his position, and he'll put forth his effort towards advancing. And if he's got the right stuff to advance, he will, right? And these kids now, they are woefully unprepared to deal with people like that. I think I am in many respects. Like, you'll come across people that'll work 16, 17, 8 hours a day. And I don't want to imply that is an end in itself. Like, I don't think that's victory, being someone that can work 16 hours a day. But when you have a mission or an objective and you have tunnel vision on something, you have to be able to do that, right? You have to. If you want to be successful, you have to put in the work at something. And so that is kind of the conclusion. And I think we're responsible for this generation. So rather than bitching about the generation, we need to start taking active steps into encouraging independence, independent thought. That's the big one there, is independent thought. How many kids are just plugged into iPads and devices now, passively consuming information? And I know schools kind of, in a way, schools create the problem and then try to find solutions to the problem. So like, they'll say, we're going to have an exercise in mindfulness where you're going to think creatively for a minute. But they're setting up the whole structure, right? They're telling you the video to watch, then they're telling you the activity to do, and then they're saying, okay, go, be creative. But that whole setup destroys the creativity, you see? Creativity comes about when you have to go inside your mind and challenge yourself, and you get something new that you haven't particularly seen before or you haven't dealt with before, and it challenges your brain. And it's a skill. Creativity is a skill that you can develop over time, right? Because you work the pathways that develop overcoming things. And creativity, we like to think it's just art, but it applies in everything. Creativity, applies for tradesmen, it applies for businessmen. Almost any profession where there's a level of skill, an element of creativity is going to be required, right? So I will leave it off on that sobering note, right? And I will talk to you guys again probably next week.